a lot of times just scratching their head and think, what is that, and where did all this stuff come from? And that's where it's been fascinating to sit there and watch the news every night, and we see them saying, we need to cut back on the size of the federal government. And every day there's something new pops up. And
That's
so
very true.
Trying to stay as non-political as we can in this, we're going to talk about this. Now, the concern arises that over the past 90 years, this isn't something that's happened during just our lifetimes. This was Grandpa and great-grandpa's days. For the past 90 years, we have department heads that have been appointed to federal bureaucracy without mention or observation or apparent awareness that a lot of what they're doing may not necessarily be constitutional. So think about this. Let's get into this a little bit. There was a fellow by the name of Michael Pepsin. He wrote a recent essay, and he said, unfortunately, that despite the first Trump administration's efforts, today the reality remains that the administrative state wields broad and extra-constitutional power without sufficient accountability or guardrails. That's a pretty big statement. They don't have the constitutional authority. Well, why are they there? Okay? Now, it immediately calls into mind two key facts, okay? Under the 10th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights, basically, it gets into the discussion of extra-constitutional simply means unconstitutional. In other words, it's not really in there. And the unconstitutional law can't have its constitutionally authority questioned if it wasn't a constitutional law to begin with. Now, this gets a little confusing.
I was going to say, I think I'm confused there.
Yes. Basically, they're not political philosophy or legal theory. They're basically straightforward principles of the U.S. Constitution. And every school kid should know these things, but we don't. Right. Not that you're a school kid.
It's been a while.
But I'm going to educate you.
All right, that
works. All right, here we go. Now, of all things, let's go back to the most bizarre thing I ever heard. We're going to go back to a decision made by the Supreme Court. And this goes all the way back to 1935. And it brought into question who has the authority to make these rules and everything that you and I are living under every day.
Right.
Well, the Supreme Court made a decision in Schechter Poultry Corporation versus the United States. A poultry company. All right?
So what does poultry have to do with?
Well, boiled down to its essence, the facts and the law in this particular case are simple. The regulations at issue were created under authority of what they called the NIRA. Again, acronyms, the alphabets, right? Okay. The National Industrial Recovery Act of 1933. This is an agency that came into being at the end of the Great Depression.
I was just going to ask,
right?
So that would be the...
So this is the Recovery Act. This is how we're going to get the country back up and running. And what they did is the federal government stepped in, and it includes price and wage fixing, as well as requirements regarding the sale of whole chickens, including sick chickens. So the federal government came in, and they're saying, we're going to regulate you, and we're going to not only check the price of what you're asking for these chickens, but we're also going to make sure the chickens are healthy. Okay? Now, again, you got to ask yourself, how did they get that authority? Well, under this Recovery Act. Now, the government claimed that the Schechter brothers sold sick chickens. All right?
Okay.
All right? And it led to the case being known as the sick chicken case. All right? Yes. Now, again, I find this fascinating that this is kind of what we're basing all the stuff that's going on today is based on the sick chicken case. And yet, I haven't heard it on the news yet, have you?
No.
No. Well, we're still looking for this, all right? No, they're not calling it that, right? Now, basically, it also included things like, as long as they were at it, they're going to include things like maximum number of hours that people could work and the right for unions to organize. It kind of became, okay, we got this sick chicken thing
So
going.
it kind of became the labor law.
Yes, they dumped a whole bunch of stuff into it. So it included prices and quality and unions and wages and the whole 9 yards. They dumped it all in there. Now, the Schechter Poultry Corporation was convicted of a crime.
Because they sold sick chickens.
Because they were selling sick chickens. Now, the crime was created by an administrative regulation. All right? Congress passed a law authorizing this administrative regulation.
So is that kind of like an ordinance made into law?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And so basically, the Supreme Court unanimously held in Schechter that the Congress had unconstitutionally delegated its legislative power. In other words, Congress in this regulation said, okay, here's what we're going to do. Under this National Industrial Recovery Act, we want you guys to make sure that nobody's selling sick chickens, that everybody has the right to organize, so on and so forth. But they didn't pass a law in Congress. They told this agency to do it. Okay? So basically, they told the agency, and the agency came up with the, we'll shut you down and we'll fine you X amount of dollars and all of this. That isn't in a law. That's just something the agency came up with on its own. All right? So what happened was, basically, Schechter's lawyers, very smart, they turned around and said, well, Congress never passed a law that said I couldn't sell sick chickens. They just said, you know, you go out there and fix things. And the agency passed a law. And it said, the agency doesn't have the authority to enforce a law on an individual. It can only Congress can make a law. And guess what? The Supreme Court agreed with the Schechter brothers, and they threw the thing out. Now, think about this, folks. In other words, if you are fined by the EPA, or you're fined under a, I don't know, any number of different agency bureaucracies that comes and throws a fine on you, did Congress pass a law that included the fine and what the violation was? Or did they just say, you guys, you need to drive a car that gets 30 miles to the gallon? All right? They didn't say your car has to meet these regulations or else. They just issued a blanket thing, said we want all the cars to meet 30 miles a gallon. And so then the agencies underneath that were the ones that enacted the laws. And that's the problem we have today, is we are answering to laws that were created by bureaucrats, not by the federal government.
Okay.
And so as they're going through these agencies and looking at all this bureaucracy that's been created, all these people that have been created simply for the purpose of enforcing whatever law that they decided was necessary,
Right.
there isn't any constitutional authority behind it.
Semantics. Can you call it a law if it's a rule?
Ah, there's a good question. Can you call it a law if it's a rule? Well, nobody's ever questioned it. You see, the problem is we don't have citizens out that are saying, under what authority are you fining me?
Well, I guess that was going to be my next thing. Is
Yes.
when you were talking about that, is there is nobody that's going back like the Schechter brothers did,
Right.
or their lawyers did, and
Right.
said, "Hey, wait a minute here."
Yeah, and the
Is
Schechter
this-
brothers, you know, they would have never done it if they hadn't been called in there and been
It's the
threatened
bad
with
sick
losing their
chickens.
business, you know. But they finally asked, and it, sure enough. Now, so think about that. 1935, and basically FDR created this agency, and the agency went out and started setting all these laws and enforcements on people, but nobody ever questioned, show me the federal law that was passed by Congress that gives you the authority. There wasn't any.
Kind of like the checks and balances.
Yes.
There's nothing there to
Yes, yes.
keep
And
that all
so
straight.
what happens is when you go to the Constitution, it said all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and House of Representatives. The most important word in all of that is the first word, all. All legislative powers, okay? There is no legislative power assigned anywhere else in the federal government, and particularly to the bureaucracies below the House and Senate. Does that make sense? Okay? These bureaucracies don't have any legislative power. All the power is in the hands of Congress. Okay? And they can't delegate that power to somebody else because the Constitution said, no, you guys have to decide. Make sense? There's also this sticky wicket here known as the 10th Amendment. Now, the 10th Amendment says the power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. In other words, real simple, if it's not in the U.S. Constitution, the states have authority. Make sense?
I believe so.
Yeah.
It
Right.
is very confusing, but
Right. So the federal government possesses only those powers expressly specified or necessarily implied in the Constitution. The Constitution does not give Congress the power to delegate any of its authority. You know, so when these agencies show up, well, we're from the federal government. No, you're not. You know, you're a bureaucracy working for the federal government. And then they're trying to enact whatever rules that they came up with. And those people who came up with them are non-elected bureaucrats.
okay.
And this has been since 1935. Okay?
I think so. I think I'm following
Yeah,
along.
okay. So the Schechter decision is pretty simple and very obvious. In the federal government, only Congress possesses any lawmaking power. Just Congress, okay? And particularly the bureaucracy, the administrative state, the swamp, whatever you want to call it, they have no lawmaking power, these agencies.
Okay.
They cannot make a law and put a fine on you. It has to come from Congress, okay? Now, it has the authority to create rules to govern how it implements its assigned responsibilities, but it cannot make regulations binding or penalizing Americans. There's the rub. In other words, they can come up with whatever policies they want to implement what Congress told them to do, but they can't create any kind of penalties or regulations on you as individuals. That can only be done by Congress.
So, like, you violate the FCC.
Yes.
They can fine you.
Right.
But technically, you don't have to pay it.
It would have to come back down to
I mean,
showing where in the Constitution does it talk about the FCC.
So I guess maybe that's one of my questions is you have the administrators that come in,
Mm-hmm.
and you have them come in and they have their pet projects.
Mm-hmm.
So like, you know, education or roadways or something like that. So they have those pet projects, but Congress can't really do anything with that until Congress says, hey, this is a law? Is that how I'm
Yes.
understanding that?
Let me give you a great example, something everybody can relate to. You have Department of Transportation, and they're saying, we want everybody to be safe driving on the roads. And so they turn around and Congress says, you know, we want, you know, all these safety regulations, and they turned it over to Transportation, and Transportation said everybody should have a seatbelt. Now, as old as I am, we didn't have seatbelts back in the day, right? Yeah. Well, you didn't need them.
We didn't use them.
In a horse and buggy, you never needed them. You know?
Well, okay, maybe
But
not.
the bottom line is they said, okay, this department decides we're going to make everybody wear a seatbelt. So they created a regulation, and they're going to give you a fine. Well, what they found out was, under the sick chicken law, they can't do that. So what they had to do is they went to every state, and guess what? It's a state law that you have to wear a seatbelt.
I was going to just say that. So they did take it back down to the state at
Right.
that point.
And the reason why is because of sick chickens. Make sense? Yeah. So there you have it. Okay. So it's a great example. Another one that we're going to hear about today on the news, from what I understood, is that they're talking about the Department of Education and trying to close the Department of Education. Well,
Right.
here's the question: where in the U.S. Constitution does it refer to education? It doesn't.
Okay, so then I guess maybe that's another question that I was thinking about is how did we get there?
Right.
How did we get to where all these things are not at the state level anymore, but are at the federal level, but they're just bureaucracies?
Yes.
How did we get to that point.
It all started with this National Industrial Recovery Act. That's where things started.
The states just went to the federal government and said, hey, we don't have the funding for
well,
this.
everybody's,
Can you fund us?
think about
Or-
it, and everybody's flat broke. They've lost everything. There's no jobs. And everybody turned to the government and say, help us. And so the
Right.
government came in and they started passing all the laws and regulations to get the country back up and running again.
But don't they usually have a stop date on that kind of stuff?
Well, evidently not.
So nobody hit the stop button.
Nobody hit the stop button. You know,
Okay.
Basically, as close as we came to a stop button is when we enter into the World War II, and that all of a sudden that changed everything as far as bringing the economy back.
Right.
But what happens here is it brings us down to this question of, does the current president, Donald Trump, understand that the bulk of the federal administrative code, you know, the policies,
Right.
are unconstitutional? And second, does he intend to do anything about it? Well, unfortunately, as they're digging into this DOJ stuff and looking at these things, you know, they went into it looking for the waste, but what they found out was, under what authority does this place even exist? And so it's going to wind up all in the courts again. We're going to have our own sick chicken case, folks. But that's what's going to happen.
And I understand that. And current administration aside, just a question to throw out there.
Sure.
Is, could there have been a different way of handling turning it back over to
Sure there
the
could have.
states?
It was real simple. All you had to do was go to Congress and say, we need to have you pass a law that gives these rights to individuals, and these are the penalties. But
or even just
politically,
if they want to turn it back over to the states, isn't there a better way of disbanding
well,
some
the
of
problem,
this
the
than-
problem you'd have there is if each state came up with their own rules.
Right, and I think
You
I
know.
brought that up to you before,
Right.
is like with the Department of Education. So if they turn that back over to the states, so Missouri has their education board and rules and regulations, whatever. And
Are we
then
going from
you
bad to
go-
worse?
That's the thing,
Yes.
is because no state is going to be
Yes.
across the board the same. The education across the board is not going to be the same.
Right.
Right, they do, but
But
I mean,
Exactly.
federal
You're
mandates
bringing up a
can-
great point. Okay, so let's say that in Missouri they decide we're not going to teach Darwinian theory. We're just simply going to do creationism. But in Kansas they decide just the opposite. So now you're going to lose the consistency from one state to the next. So now are you going to send your kids over here to have them educated or
Right.
over there?
Well, and that's the other thing is, you know, I know that our test scores, and I think we'll probably get onto that later, but are low
Right,
across the nation.
right.
So obviously there are some flaws with
Sure.
what we've got going on now, but wouldn't it be worse in that respect as trying to get everybody the same quality education, especially if they're trying to go to college?
Well, and think about it. It could be worse, it could be better. What if you've got a state that has just some top-of-the-line crackerjack leaders of their education department, and everybody wants to go to that state with their kids to get them educated?
Well, and that's the other thing.
Whereas you got this other one, their kids are at the bottom of the heap, and they're
Right.
not going to get any better. Why would I live in this state?
Right.
The market would create.
Yes, and what the comment is the market would drive a lot of this. But again, do we really want the market driving it? So
Well, and again,
these
those
are
are
a
those-
lot of really good questions, you see.
Those are all things that
And again, you bring up such a great question. How did this happen? Well, it started with sick chickens, okay?
that's
Now, here's something to think about, a little history, because I've always got to go down the history path. When crafting the Constitution, one of the central concerns of the federal government, or the founding fathers, if you will, was how best you control the federal government. No kidding. Now think about that. All the way back, 1789, they're sitting there saying, okay, we're going to create this federal government. How do we control them?
Well, they've had a lot of things to look at. I mean, look at
Yeah.
where they were coming from and what they were leaving.
Yeah, and so what they said is, okay, we're going to have kind of a balance between the states and this new central government, because, the states, it was 13 independent colonies, and they were like,
Right.
you're not going to come in here with some, huge bureaucracy, and we just overthrew a king last thing we want
Right,
is another one.
well, that's what I was kind of getting at there, is
Right.
that they've already came from that. They were seeing what other countries were doing at
And
the time.
so they were trying to get something that everybody could agree to that they could sign off on. And what they came up with was this idea of shared authority between the federal government and the states.
Right.
Unfortunately, that's where we are today, is we're still struggling, how
For
do
that
we control
balance.
it? Yeah, for the balance, right? Now, here's something to think about. They settled on a national government with defined but limited powers, okay? The first 10 amendments of the Constitution, those are all restrictions on the federal government. They're not restrictions on us. If you read them, they are all things that we're saying, you have to have these things in the Constitution to protect us, the people, okay? And so it's very clear.
Right.
They did not want this strong central government. They also came up with the checks and balances, the executive and legislative and judicial branches, which we're seeing fight amongst themselves now,
Right.
aren't we? Right? Isn't it amazing? We're right back where we started from.
Well,
Kind of.
that's what I'm kind of afraid of.
Yeah, exactly,
Is that whole thing there.
Now, federalism is the word used to describe the Constitution's system of dividing political power between the national government and the states. Okay? And from day one, they've been struggling with that. Now, just very simple. Article 1 through 111 on the Constitution says the legislative branch of Congress makes the laws. Okay?
Right.
That's the first thing we were talking about.
That's what I remember learning.
Right. The executive branch, led by a single president, enforces the laws. The executive branch does.
Right.
And then the judicial branch, headed by a single Supreme Court, interprets the laws. And that's where we are. This is where you're seeing on the news every night what's going on. Okay, first off, Congress, do you have a law that says they can do this? No.
No.
Well,
I don't
then
know.
we've got an issue, Yeah, why do they exist? And so then, the president is enforcing the law. So, well, they don't have a law, so therefore, I'm going to shut down education.
Okay.
See?
Okay.
Okay. And now it's going to wind up in the Supreme Court to say, well, wait a minute, we need to do something about this. We need to fix this. Back to the sick chicken thing.
Right.
Right.
Right. So if they do,
I wish we should have had a fake chicken here.
we
dead
could have
chicken.
had one of those rubber
dead chickens. That would have been great.
Every time you said sick chicken, we squeeze it.
Right.
But I guess the next thing is if the Education Board Department of Education at the federal level does go and fight this, it's got to go to court before.
Right.
And then Congress can go back and say.
Right. And Congress can fix it very easily by
they could just say.
just by creating a law that says, yes, here we are.
Right, but then
And-
how long would that take to?
I don't know.
Pass through.
How old are you? Yes,
I'm not
you
gonna-
know, it'll,
I'm
it'll
not
be a
gonna say
long
that out
time.
loud.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah. So how did this system of checks and balances work? Take a simple example. Congress was given the power to make our nation's laws, but the president was given the power to veto any law passed by Congress.
Okay, so let me ask this question. So
Yes.
if he's determined to take this back to the states, even though Congress passes that law, he can say,
Yep.
nope,
Yep.
sorry.
Which throws it all back in again.
But then at that point, could they not take it back to the judicial part of it?
Yes.
So
And
it's
then
just going to be a vicious cycle
Exactly.
all throughout.
Encouraging, isn't it?
Right?
Yes,
Makes me feel so
everybody
good.
thinks, oh, it's all going to change tomorrow. No, it's
No.
not, folks. Yeah. Now, framers borrowed all of these key principles of a system of checks and balances from the Enlightenment period. Now, it's interesting. What happened was we're a unique country in that our founding fathers were probably the most well-read, educated people in all of America.
Right.
And what they had done is they had read the writings of Locke and Montesquieu, Voltaire, Diderot. All of these thinkers were coming up during that time with what would be the best form of government, what would be the best judicial system, what would be the best education system. And we were unique in the entire world in that we had the opportunity to take all the great ideas and create our Constitution.
Right.
Up till then, kings, czars, queens, dictators, whatever.
Right.
But
They
we
had
took
all
all the greatest information, put it together, and created something. And it's worked pretty good.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, as opposed to the alternative. Now, what was interesting is they put it all together, get this document, this Constitution, and they send it out there. And they said, okay, we need 2/3 of the states to approve it, the colonies. Well, that's where we got into the whole thing of the Bill of Rights. You know, I don't see anything in here about freedom of speech and so on and so forth. So they added 10 amendments to it and said, okay, looks good, until they got to the 10th one, and they said, well, we could keep adding stuff. And they said, we'll just say anything that comes up after this, it goes to the states. All right?
Gotcha.
It's not in the Constitution. Now, the way they argued this was through the newspaper, something called the Federalist Papers.
Right, which we've talked about before.
Right, and they weren't formal papers. What they were was letters to the editor, okay? And James Madison was the big hammer on this. Hamilton, Madison, John Jay, they all wrote essays, letters to the editor. But the most important one to me is Madison wrote Federalist number 51. And it talks about, he titled it, "The structure of government must furnish the proper checks and balances between the different departments." And in it, he explained how the Constitution structure checked the powers of each of the groups. This is where you get into the legislative, executive, and judicial, all right? Now, it was a combination of separation of powers and checks and balances. Now, I'm just going to read you a quote from this. He explains the system in one of the most famous passages in American history. He said, "Ambition must be made to counteract ambition." All right? He said, "The interest of the man must be connected with the constitutional rights of the place. It may be a reflection on human nature that such devices should be necessary to control the abuses of government." 1789. We need something to control the abuses of government, folks. But what is the government itself but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? And this is a great quote. "If men were angels, no government would be necessary.
That's very true.
If angels were to govern men, neither external or internal controls on government would be necessary." In other words, he's saying, I know even we, the founding fathers, are not angels.
Well, that's the thing, is everybody's going to come in with their own agenda of things to get done.
Surely not.
I mean-
surely not. Yeah.
And I do understand that.
For Madison, ambition must be made to counteract ambition because the Constitution assumes that human nature is imperfect and that all politicians and factions will seek greater political power, just like you just said, all right? Now, this brings us to the idea of federalism, okay? Now, the Constitution never really says anything, it never uses the word federalism, okay? But it's like ragu, it's in there, all right? Now, for the founding generation, federalism, it was an important way of bringing government closer to the American people. In other words, if it's not in the Constitution, put it back in the states. Even today, who's the head of the EPA? I don't know, right?
I have no idea.
But if I had problems with water quality at the lake, at the state level, I can find out pretty quick who I need to talk to and have them down here. That was the idea.
Right.
So that it brings it down to a level where the people are actually in a position where they have some control and they're closer to their government. At the federal level, it's gotten to the point where we're clueless. We don't have any idea where does this come from.
Right.
Right? And so for the founding fathers, the federalism was an important way of simply letting the people be closer to their government, okay? And bear in mind, Lincoln's the one that said government of the people, and by the people, for the people. Now, by breaking the powers of government up, and not only a national government, this gives a ton of power to state governments. And this is where we've drifted. We have, I know throughout my whole generation, it's always been, well, we can't do that because the feds say so. Well, it never used to be that way,
Right.
okay? And so, and the real thing that hammered us is when the income tax came along and we gave them our money and they said, we won't give it back to you unless you do what the feds say, all right? So let's go back to the original question. Does Donald Trump understand what I'm explaining here? Maybe we ought to send this whole thing to him, you think? Because he's going to butt heads with the states.
Well, and he already is.
Oh, yeah.
He already is. How many things are in the judicial court right now of him And the states.
Yes, yes. And so he's up against it here, all right? Now, I want to add one more thing here. Enumerated powers, okay? Basically, the idea is that the government needs to be shrunk here, all right?
Right.
And people are all asking themselves the question, well, what exactly powers does the government have? What if I told you that the powers of the federal government under the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, according to the Constitution, the federal government is only supposed to have 18 powers. 18 total. Now think about that. Yeah. I mean, this is things
That's
like,
not very
you know,
much. I mean,
things
honestly.
like coining money, declare war, create a post office. There's only 18 things that they're supposed to be able to do. Yet, look where we're at now.
Well, we have a lot of
Things. Right? Now, basically, these powers were reserved for the federal government because there are things only the federal government can do, all right? It's things, like I say, declare war, lay and collect taxes, the idea of tariffs and duties. Tariffs, there you go.
Tariffs,
yeah, that's in the Constitution. They can do that.
Yes.
In fact, that's how we made all our money before we had the income tax, is the whole country ran on tariffs, okay? Now, notice that the Founding Fathers only intended for enough tax revenue to be raised to pay the national debt and provide for the common defense. It says it right there in the Constitution. Think about that. I'll say that again. Think about it. Pay the national debt.
Right.
And provide for the common defense. Yet somehow, what are we talking about? Sesame Street for Iraq? How does that happen? Okay? They're taking our tax dollars and spending money for things like that.
Right.
I don't think that James Madison would have probably gone along with that.
I would have
right?
approved of that.
Now, nowhere does this clause mention programs like foreign aid, the Green New Deal, education, EPA, federal housing, Medicaid, Medicare, SNAP, you name it. Run down the whole list. It's not in there.
Right.
Okay? And yet, somehow, out of these 18 things they were supposed to do, all of these things have been created. How does that happen?
Well,
right?
I guess again, that goes back to the original question I asked: is how does this? What is it? The administration's coming in with their own agendas, or is it? Hey, the states going. Hey, we don't know how to regulate this. We need your help. Or
a study is done, and they come out and said, "My God, the air is polluted and the water is polluted."
Right.
And so Congress said, "Fix it. Create an EPA, an Environmental Protection Agency, and fix it." And the EPA then came up with all the rules and regulations. Again, they can't do that. It's Congress has to do
Right.
it. So that's how it happens.
Again,
it's all good intentions.
Again, it kind of goes back to the ordinance and the law thing.
Right.
Just because it's an ordinance doesn't mean that.
Goes back to sick chickens.
Right.
Right?
Right.
There you have it. Now, in Clause 11 of the Constitution, it grants the federal government the power to go to war, and only if it formally declares war. Rather than go into a deep hole on this, think about it. How many hundreds of $billions have we spent on the Ukraine war, yet we've never declared war? So how do they do that, right? Yeah, so again, somebody's going to have to step back and say, and it's simple to fix. Congress just needs to simply declare war on Russia, and then they can authorize the money.
Right.
But instead, no, we'll just...
It's the foreign aid or the...
Yes, yes. You see where I'm going with this?
I see where you're going with
know.
this.
And again, understand, this is not left or right. I'm not telling you anything. This has been going on. It started under a Democratic administration, but we've been, Democrats and Republicans and everything else all along the way, and the system is there. This is what you hear about the swamp. This is what they're talking about. Both parties are equally as guilty of this whole thing.
Well, yes, they are.
Yes.
Because, again, it's the whole,
Right.
What do they want to see get done? How can they get it done?
Bingo. All right? Now, all the existing administrative state can and should probably be overhauled. Every bit of it, somebody needs to go in, knock on the door, and say, tell me, under what authority are you doing these things?
Again, that kind of goes back to what I said originally. Current administration aside, is there a different way that all this could be handled?
Yes, absolutely.
Rather than,
You know, it was Reagan came up with a lot of the HUD programs, Housing and Urban Development.
right,
You know, and it created a huge bureaucracy,
right,
you know. But they said, you know, we need to find housing for the poor. And so they create HUD and off they go. And then it's like, well, wait, you know, how can we do that? All right, makes sense? Now, according to the U.S. Constitution, the states should have jurisdiction over these programs because it's not in the Constitution.
right.
All right? So if you want housing and urban development, you want a SNAP program for providing food, if you want your own environmental protection, whatever, it all should go to the states unless Congress wants to take it and specifically sit down and write it all out as to here's what we want done.
Right.
Make sense?
Makes sense now.
Okay, all right.
It's becoming clearer.
Think about this, just as an aside. I did a little research on it. The Federal Department of Education, which they're talking about doing away with, okay, has 4,400 employees. None of them are teachers, okay? They have an annual budget of $241 billion.
See, and I guess maybe that's the other thing that kind of is amazing, that they have these people that are in these bureaucracies and they've never been in that position, you know, as a teacher or as an educator or anything like that. So how can they decide what works best when they're not in the classroom or haven't been in the classroom
Well,
or
now you're
these
just
other areas?
You're just talking crazy talk.
I know,
aren't you?
I know. I'm just throwing that out there. I'm just throwing that out there.
You know, think about this. We spend more per pupil, $16,080 a year, than any other country in the world.
Well, aren't kids, like when they're born, and again, my kids are 18 and 21, so by the time they're born, aren't they so many X amount of dollars in debt already before they've even gone to school or even thought about a college career or anything like that?
Well, and you bring up a great point. You know, go back and read letters from during the period of the Civil War, et cetera, and look at the writing that these soldiers were, the capability they had of writing a letter. Amazing.
Yes.
They learned in a one-room
penmanship.
schoolhouse, had, you know, 4 or 5 years of education, and all they used was a one-room schoolhouse and a McGuffey's reader.
Right.
And yet, today, here we are, we're ranked 16th in science, 34th in math, and out of the top 37 wealthy countries. So something's jumped the tracks here. We're throwing money at it, but it's not fixing anything, okay? Now, the reason that all these other departments need to be looked at is simply the 10th Amendment of the Bill of Rights, okay? If it's not, the power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, bottom line, it goes to the states. So, you know, that's just simply following the Constitution. Now, what's happened since the turn of the last century? Congress, who the enumerated powers primarily applied to, has ceded most of their constitutional authority to the bureaucracies below them. That's where we're at, okay? And so when you see these Senate hearings and stuff where they bring these department heads in and they sit there and say, so how in the world have you been able to do this? Well, I don't know, it's the way it was when I got here. You know, well, sure, it's been that way for 90 years. You know, they don't have the answers, right?
We've always done it. We should continue
the
doing it.
only way the country is going to fix this is if we go back to what Washington, Adams, Jefferson, and Franklin all said. You know, let's get back down to Congress makes the laws, but if you want a law, you're going to have to go all the way down into the weeds and straighten this mess out.
Well, and that's understandable.
Right.
I mean,
but you are certainly going to upset the apple cart. One more thing I have for you, and I thought this was interesting. I pulled up the Missouri Constitution, all right?
Yep.
And specifically, Missouri's Bill of Rights. So let's stir the pot a little bit here. This is my final point. Here it is. The Missouri Constitution, Article 1, says the Missouri is a free and independent state, subject only to the Constitution of the United States, that all proposed amendments to the Constitution of the United States, qualifying or affecting the individual liberties of the people, of which in any wise may impair the right of local self-government belonging to the people of this state. And any other changes you make, they have to be submitted to conventions of the people. In other words, we comply with the Constitution of the U.S., but everything else,
It's at the state level.
state level. Isn't that interesting? So, again, I'm not talking Republican.
No.
I'm not talking Democrat.
No, it's
I'm
just
talking
across the board. It's
across the
what-
board law. Remember the sick chicken, okay?
Good, I think we needed a chicken at the
That's
point.
right. I turn it over to you, my friend.
You turn it over to me.
Yes, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what's going on at the
We've
library.
got some really big, exciting things going
I
on.
know
right
we
here.
do. I know we do.
So Saturday, March 29th, which is actually next weekend.
Yes.
We're going to be doing a trivia night at the Elks Lodge.
Elks Lodge.
In Osage Beach. Trivia, 50-50 raffle. There'll be cash bar. You can bring a group of 5. $100 for that. $25 for individual tickets. We're just looking to have.
See if you're smarter than a librarian.
Actually, that is. Are you smarter than a librarian? That's how we've been billing it.
No,
so.
I'm not. No.
We all have our strengths.
That's right.
You're our
That's right.
history book.
Yeah, I'm really good at the history stuff. Yeah,
I'm learning
yeah,
more.
Yeah.
But all proceeds for this event will go to our children's programming. We'd like to be able to do more throughout the year. We do spend most of our budget on our summer reading program, which is an excellent program, but it'd be nice to be able to see
And
things.
if I could say something to that too, people say, oh, don't you get tax funding for your programs and all? Yes, we do, but we're on a fixed income. It's just like Social Security. We get X amount of dollars every year, and it does not go up or down. And the problem is that people have shown that they really enjoy these programs, like having Dickerson Park Zoo and some of these people come up. Well, their costs are going up. And as their costs are going up, paying for fuel and feed and every other thing that they have, they charge us for the programs. And for us to be able to continue to pay for the programs and have as many programs as we want, we are trying to figure out a way to gain additional funding so we can have more and more of those programs.
Exactly. That is exactly it. One of the other things that we are going to be doing through the month of April is our Reading as a Journey. This is a very cool program, I think. We hope to get more people into our libraries. So one way we're going to do that is you visit your local library, you pick up a passport. It's just going to be a little booklet, probably not much bigger than this. I should have brought one up here with me. And then you visit each library. As you visit each library, check out our travel section, check out our display that we'll have on travel, because it's kind of like the whole thing, the Reading as a Journey type thing. And then get your passport stamped. Once you get all 6 passport stamps, turn it into a library. It doesn't matter which one. You'll get an entry form to enter into our grand prize drawings. We have 2 different drawings that you could put your name into. One is we have prizes that are all reading themed, and then the second prize is all travel themed. So kind of a little something. And this is for ages 18 and older. We did it more that way for them. But that's all during the month of April. So
Great.
The other thing is we're going to be having an open house on April 9th at all 6 of our libraries from 5 to 7 p.m. Come in, learn what we do, take a tour of our libraries. We should have Camdenton, Osage Beach, and Sunrise Beach will have their 3D printers running. We'll have computers set up where we can help you learn more about some of our online resources we have, like Libby, Hoopla, Learning Express, the newspapers that we have online. Just come in, visit with us, get to know us, and just hang out with us. That's all we ask. So, actually, and then today we have the Golden Bluegrass group in. These gentlemen and ladies are actually, they used to play. Let me see if I can remember what he said. They played at Lee Mace's Opry. So I think Denver Golden's one of the members of that. Dave Bakke is one of those members. So they're going to actually come kind of where we're set up today from noon to 2.
Great timing after the Grand Ole Opry in 100 years last
Right,
night. Anybody
right.
watch that? That was pretty cool.
So
Yeah.
they're going to come in and they're going to play some bluegrass music for us, and we might have some singers, but that's going to be every Thursday now from noon to 2. So that's something kind of exciting that we're going to have at the Camdenton Library. And then Saturday, April 5th, if you are a gardener, Stoutland Library is actually holding a seed exchange that day at their library from 9 to noon. Due to lack of parking last year, the Baptist Church over there has kindly donated their parking lot to us for that day, so that way they can do that. But they're going to have a master gardener there to answer any questions you might have about gardening. There's also going to be, I think the gentleman from Baker's Creek is going to be there, and he also donated seeds. MFA donated seeds, Missouri Wildflowers donated, Gurney's, and then also local gardeners. If you've harvested your seeds, you're more than welcome to pass those around and share them with everybody else
This
as well.
is such a great idea.
Right, isn't it though?
Yeah, our librarian, Marie Brown,
yep.
she got with some of the locals there in their garden clubs, and they came up with this, and it's just really a neat idea.
It is a very neat
and it is
idea, and I would like to see us hopefully maybe do something similar here. I know Osage Beach has got a seed exchange as well. Kendra said she cannot keep the seeds on their rack. They keep going. But we do have the community garden out back here.
I need to send my wife to this.
There you go.
She can
See?
kill a plastic plant, I'm
She can
convinced,
kill a
you know. Yeah.
I'm not telling Karen,
Yeah.
sorry. I didn't say it.
Yeah.
So that'll be something fun. And then also at that event, the school resource officer, Candy Greer, will also be there. She usually does story time with the kids on the first Saturday of the month.
Great.
So she said she'd be there to kind of entertain the kids. And then the last thing I have is Keisha Duncan with the Better Business Bureau. I'll get it spit out. Will be at the Camden and Osage Beach libraries. She'll be at the Camden Library on Thursday, April 10th at 4 p.m. and then Osage Beach Friday, April 11th at noon to discuss what we need to know about the Better Business Bureau. She'll provide a little history about the BBB. Attendees will receive a free list of consumer services and the top scams and how you can protect yourself from those scams and what you can do if you get scammed. So
Good.
yeah,
Yeah.
just a little.
Great. So you can see there's an awful lot going on.
We
you
do,
know.
and those are just a few of the things that we
Yes.
have going on. We do have a whole calendar of events. If you go online at our website and then click on the little circle that says events, it will take you to our calendar of events, and everything is listed there.
You bet.
So
Great.
our next episode,
Our next episode,
April 17th.
April 17th.
Got a topic?
I've got one, but I'm not sure I want to tackle it. We'll see how this goes. I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about those tariffs and stuff, but we'll see. Yeah.
Might be interesting.
Right.
Might be something.
We'll probably have a lot more information by then. Yeah.
It'll be like a tennis match.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
That's what I feel like now, is
Exactly.
watching a tennis
You
match.
bet. You bet. Yeah.
All
So
right.
that's all I've got.
That's
and
all I've got.
I can't thank you all enough for tuning in. Again, stop by your library. You will be absolutely amazed all of the things that we have here for the public to utilize, the programs, the equipment we have. If you got a question, give us a call. We'll be happy to help y'all.
And I'm going to add one caveat to that. The Camden Library, if you've been in recently, you've noticed that we've done some changes. We've made some moves and things. So we are working on getting signage back where it needs to be so everybody
Yes.
doesn't get lost anymore.
That's right.
So we're good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.